Hello and welcome to this video giving you a peek inside the new Arkham Files game from Fantasy Flight Games. If you want to know what the game is about, check out our 60-second guide video, as today we are all about the physical stuff. The front cover has a beautiful painting by Jacobus Wagintas, a familiar name amongst Arkham Files artists. The rear has a teaser of the game board and the character art plus some setting blurb, a full components list and the sleeve requirements. The box has the same footprint as the Arkham Horror 3rd Edition box, but is noticeably taller. At 4 inches deep, this is the same size as the Gen 7 box from Plaid Hat Games. Opening it up, the first thing you see is a 28-page Learn to Play guide and then a 24-page rules reference. Despite the bland-looking covers, the Learn to Play guide is full colour with plenty of text boxes and fully illustrated examples, which is great for identifying the correct components. The backgrounds are plain, but the pages have a mild green tint to them. The text is as small as usual for FFG products, but is black, bold and a legible font. There are plenty of headings, which is good as there is no index or table of contents. There is a quick summary of the icons and the monster activation on the rear. The rules reference has a purple tinge and uses a paragraph numbering system similar to the Arkham Horror 3rd Edition rulebook. The tiny table of contents on the cover uses page numbers and the index uses paragraph numbers. These are extremely faint and anyone reading under low light or with poor vision could certainly have trouble. Everything is arranged alphabetically by topic. There are very few illustrations or examples except for the 4 pages of game setup steps. Next is a single-page advertisement for unrelated novels and a solo computer game. Now comes the single punch board of cardboard tokens, uncharacteristically modest for an FFG game. These are full colour, double-sided and about 2mm thick. Remember, when unpunching your tokens, apply even pressure from the side with the visible cut to avoid tearing. The tokens are awkward shapes, so you would need to use an adhesive plastic or a spray varnish as opposed to something like a coin protector if you wanted to maximize their lifespan. Moving on to the shrink wrap board, this is a massive single piece 6-fold board measuring 33 inches by 22 inches or roughly 84 by 56 centimeters. This construction is called a pants fold, which you may have seen on other FFG games. It is so named as the 2 long sections that bend at the hip and the knee resemble a pair of trousers, and pants are the unmentionable undergarments that civilized folk wear underneath their trousers. The ship is beautifully illustrated by long-term FFG tilemaker Henning Ludvigsson, whose work you have probably placed miniatures on in Mansions of Badness, but trust us, he gets everywhere. The high contrast location names and numbers should be visible across the table, but the reminder text probably won't be. There is plenty of room for the miniatures in each relevant space, thankfully. It has marked areas for placing cards near the board, but not actually on it, despite the large areas of decorated blank space that could hold cards. This is probably so players aren't reaching across the board and knocking over the miniatures. A notable exception is the Mythos deck, which doesn't get its own space and is simply placed near the board during setup. There are also 4 self-assembly dials which are designed to remain permanently in place when the game is stored. Despite being brand new, our board arrived with noticeable damage. Guess we'd better buy a second copy then. Moving on to the bag of 86 standard American board game size cards. This is where you notice you have simultaneously the most beautiful and at the same time the blandest looking board game. Standard American board game size is the same height as cards like Magic the Gathering, but not as wide. And you know this is an FFG game as you draw a card, read some flavor text and execute a test involving some random chance. One nice touch is that cards that only apply to a specific character have these green highlights so you can easily identify and discard it if that character isn't in play. Next up is a Ziploc bag with 205 mini American board game size cards, which again are super bland and super beautiful. And also somewhere in between. You will have seen this size in most other Arkham Horror Files games. What is interesting is that there are more than double the amount of mini cards to regular cards. Is this a cost-cutting measure or a commitment to the environment to use less materials? The card backs are mostly bland with a little bit of colour to help you distinguish them from across the table. Ignoring this little bag of plastic widgets just for a moment, the third and final Ziploc pack of cards are these 19 oversized ones. No doubt you will have seen this size before in other Arkham games, as it is a common size for investigator cards. If you hadn't heard, this game is set at least a decade before the bulk of the Arkham Files game, so these are brand new characters that you won't have heard of. Even the dog is new. There are 10 characters. These are drawn from a highly diverse selection of people, all of which have an incredibly researched and emotional backstory, which you'll probably just flip over and treat as a faceless set of numbers. In addition to the 10 character cards, there are 6 summary cards, with the turn structure and key rules on one side, and a detailed listing of the actions granted by the interior ship spaces so you don't have to keep leaning over the board. As well as 3 traitor rule cards with a revealed summary on one side and a monster activation recap on the reverse. Probably best not to take one of these till you reveal yourself. Oh, and did you see these bends? That isn't the cheap lens on our cheap mobile phone. These cards arrived pre-pringled. Going back to the bag of widgets, you have the transparent stands, a die with 8 sides, and plastic connectors for the dials on the game board. You may be familiar with these 2-part plugs through FFG's other games or our coverage of them, but once you manage to pull them apart, assembly is easy. The die has large and legible numbers, but we would have preferred it to be black for maximum contrast. You will see why it is this colour shortly. Moving on to the plastic stands, there is one question that dominates each new FFG unboxing. Will there be enough stands for each character, or only enough for one per player, forcing you to constantly swap and damage the cardboard or purchase additional product? Oh, here we go. Looks good so far, and yes, you get a full complement of 10 stands, plus 2 extra for the trackers. These are identical to the Arkham Horror 3rd edition size at just over 4 centimeters. There is the familiar printed cardboard insert, and aren't we forgetting something? 2 Ziploc bags full of miniatures, one with a pair of unique oversized brutes and the other with 20 identical figures. These are a resin or rigid plastic, so plenty of detail and no wobbly extremities. The larger figures look to be multi-part sculpts that come cleaned and pre-assembled. The biggest figure, Mother Hydra, is 3 inches tall, significantly bigger than a cardboard standee. The green colouring looks great and is perfect for those people who don't paint their miniatures. It also explains the green dye. They are very spiky, however, so do be careful when handling, transporting and storing them, as parts can easily snag and break off. We definitely wouldn't be happy just keeping them loose in the box. These look great and add a real table presence. It is hard to imagine this game with the traditional flat monster cards. Thanks for joining us for Unfathomable Week. Check out our Unfathomable playlist to see if there are any videos you haven't seen.